Welcome everybody to our Emmy Q&A Zoom for 2024. I'm Pamela Young of the Awards Committee, along with Paula Marqueski and Chris Sanchez. Executive Director Daryl Compton is on, as is Wayne Friedman, last year's awards chair and member of the National Awards Committee. President Brooks DeRose says he'll be on a little later. So hopefully together we can demystify the entry process and answer some of your questions. As you know, the deadline is next week, Friday. We would love it if you could get your entries in as soon as possible, because we will have, and I'm guessing now, more than 1,000 entries to go through before we send them out for judging. The first thing we always advise is to read the rules in the call for entries. Even if you've entered a dozen times before, the rules and the category notes change, so please start off by reacquainting yourself with this year's rules. We've already received some questions from the people who are working who couldn't make the Zoom, but let's start with some of the folks who are here. So who's got a question?
Richard Harmelink in Fresno. So I have a question. Our station is going to enter a newscast category, but our station doesn't know until next week what newscasts are going to enter, and some people are on vacation. What is the final day people can add their name? And I know it's going to include a late fee. What's the final day to add a name?
March 31st.
Okay.
Is there a way around the late fee?
No, there's no way around the late fee. It's $25 to add a name.
And that date
after the 12th.
after the 12th. Okay.
And for a newscast entry, what is the TRT? 30 minutes?
30 minutes.
Yep.
So if you were to have an hour newscast, you can do a lift. You can't re-edit it, but you could choose, your A segment, your C segment, a D segment. You could skip B if that's what you choose to do.
The question on newscasts that has been coming up is people try to enter their breaking news into, they've done a hit on a breaking news story, and they turn over their entire newscast to that breaking news story, and they enter it as a newscast. That's possible. The newscast still has to be listed as the actual newscast name that is used, Channel 7 News at 6 or whatever it is, and then a colon with what the subtitle is. To be a newscast, it has to have basically news, weather, and sports type stuff. So even if it's a breaking news story, if it's considered a newscast, they still have to do at least weather and update of top stories of other news that's in there. It can't just be breaking news. Otherwise, it's going to get pulled and moved over to breaking news or continuing coverage type thing, depending on how long it runs. So beware of that when you're in a newscast.
Daryl, the newscasts also do apply to double dipping. So correct? If
No,
you
it's
They
if
do
you have a
apply
whole
to-
segment of
yeah.
breaking news, can that also be a breaking news category?
No.
Right. It has to be newscast or breaking news.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. The same material can only be entered once, and that includes newscast stuff. So
Is it newscast exempt from double dipping?
it used to be, but not any longer. It's now a regular category. The only one that's exempt is the overall excellence that can have excerpts from various programs and newscasts, and there's no double dipping in overall excellence.
Daryl, do you want to talk a little bit about how that double dipping applies in news? In other words, or I can explain it, at least I think I understand this. The same story can appear in an individual entry and also in a newscast, but not the same names with the same story. Is that still correct for you?
Yes, that is correct. As long as that, in other words, if the story is there and you did a story and you want to air it in a specific other category, as long as your name is not on the newscast, you can do that. But if your name is on the newscast also, then that would be a double dip.
Sophie's choice.
Yeah.
I've got a question from a lot of first timers. Who are the entries judged by, and where are they?
Well, I'll take that one. We have really sophisticated the judging over the last few years, where in the old days, basically, we used to bicycle videotape from us to another chapter, and they would take the news conference room and bring 7 people in, a couple of people from different stations, and would spend the evening looking at the tapes that we sent them, would score on paper, and then put it all back in a FedEx box and send it back. Then we went from 2-inch tape to 1-inch tape to 3/4-inch tape to 1/2-inch tape to DVD, and now to online. And now once it's been online, we were still doing the trading with other chapters where they look at our entries and we look at their entries. The sophistication part that's happened the last couple of years is, in order to get a better bell curve on judging, we now require only 2 judges from each chapter. So each entry will go to 4 different chapters, and each of those 4 chapters will supply 2 peer judges. And a peer judge is someone that works in the same area that the category is. So if it's photography, you have to be a photographer. If it's editing, you have to be an editor. If it's a newscast, you need to work on the regular newscast type thing. So we have 2 from each different chapter, and those are mixed. We trade with different chapters each year. We don't tell you who we're trading with until the Emmy Gala, and then we make the list available. But you can kind of figure it out when you see emails from me saying, we are judging X chapter, and would you please help judge? And that's probably one we're trading with. There are some that we traded with last year that we're not trading with this year type thing, and there's still leftovers and stuff. So you can't tell 100%, but gives you an idea. If you're judging another chapter, they may be judging your stuff also. Judging is really, go ahead.
Daryl touched on it, but I think that this is a really great improvement to the judging system, because it's not like we get sent to a market that has different sensibilities than our own market, right? Like sometimes we would say, oh, that went to Nebraska. They don't know what we do, or the Bay Area is different. I think this really gives us a well-rounded bell curve of judges, as Daryl said. It's not just one city deciding the fate of your entry.
Correct.
Welcome, Brooks.
Thank you very much. Good to see you all.
So is there anyone else on the call who has a question?
This is Itai Had from KPIX. Wanted to find out whether when you submit for, say, writing, best writing, or whatever the category may be, is it better to do a composite, or I've submitted before like a good piece that I thought was well written from beginning to end and just gave them that one piece. What is your take on?
I think you can do either, whatever you think is strongest. I've done both of them, and the judges look at both formats.
Is there, when you do the composite, how do you recommend doing it if you do go the composite way?
Now, is this for news or content? For news.
News.
So it's 3 separate stories.
If
you did
This
a
is in a
composite,
craft category, correct?
right?
say that again?
You're talking about like a craft category, like writing?
Correct. Like if you're doing, like you're going for best writing category, if you do a composite, what would be the best way to sort of edit that together?
There's no formula.
Except that it must have 1 second of black in between each segment. So it has to be you can't edit within the segments. So it has to be a direct lift with 1 second of black in between each.
You're allowed as many as 5 drops or 5 lifts in there, but and you're allowed, I think, something like 15 minutes, but shorter is better.
Sounds like a lot.
Shorter is better. I've won writing with 1 entry. I've won writing with 3 entries. I've won a lot of writings with 2 entries, and that applies to pretty much every category that you have in the craft categories. Look at what you want to enter, and then decide what goes strongest. Sometimes the best way to do these is One of them, you know, the first time, the first piece, the first cut, to impress that you're certainly qualified and good at this. And maybe the second one is the entry that sells them, and then you're out of there. If you can do it under 5 minutes, even better, because if it's 5 minutes or less, they must watch the entire submission. If it's longer than 5 minutes, then time limits kick in. If it's 5 minutes and 5 seconds, they might have to watch only 75% of it. So you want them to see what you want them to see, the whole darn thing. So shorter is better. And
since you already talked about this, may I ask you one more question, which is when you put together the submission, say for not the craft pieces, but the craft categories, but regular sort of categories, what's the best way to do it? I've heard that you shouldn't sort of take off the intros, the anchor intros, only start it from the beginning of the piece, take out your live shot at the beginning, just because those time limits. How do those time limits actually work?
Well, you figure when you enter, the judges have an option of watching all of it if it's under 5 minutes or 25 or 50%, depending on the timing. So you want to hit them right off the top with your best stuff. If your anchor intro is necessary, then fine, include it. But you also have the précis where you can talk about your entry. But yeah, you want to grab the judge's attention right from the start.
I would add that you want to hit them hard at the beginning, but you better be good at the end, because that's when they write down their score. This is not
Thank you.
That's a great tip.
Thank
I
you.
would say, please do read each category, because some categories like MMJ, for instance, in the craft category, that should not include the anchor intros, correct? So that should be just your your MMJ.
We were real specific on that this year. An MMJ entry has to be only done by the MMJ. There cannot be a lick of video shot by anyone else. There was one question over one last year where we had an MMJ who'd shot the story sitting on a set in front of a studio camera doing the introduction, which we allowed. But that's about as far as you go, and that's the honor system. Bottom line is, if you shot the intro yourself and you're in the field and you got the camera there, good, go ahead. If they send a camera person to shoot that intro for you, you're in violation. And there's also look carefully at that entry in terms of how much external video they allow you to use. I forget what the percentages are, but it's got to be mostly your stuff.
I don't know if this is helpful, but on the composite entries, when I'm judging them, I tend to, if they're longer than 5 minutes, I tend to skip around, but I definitely watch the beginning, and maybe, a third to a quarter of the time I'll watch the beginning, and then I'll skip down to the middle somewhere, but I'll always watch the very beginning and the very end to get a sense of the composite. I'm not sure how it's up to the judge how much of that they look at, and what order they look at, or maybe they just look at the first 10 minutes and not the rest of it.
I do think, on that note, the reminder of putting your best work in and not just trying to fill the time. Again, like to Wayne's point, and everybody has mentioned, shorter is better if it's your best work. If you're just trying to fill the time, I would not enter it, not include it in the submission.
Hit them with something good to open it, and then close it with something better. That's the ideal.
I had a question just a few minutes ago. The craft categories, can you enter a team instead of just one person for talent?
It depends on the craft, but yes, you can. And if you have trouble doing that, contact me, because most of them are set up for a single person. If you have a writing team of 3 people that wrote a documentary, you can have 3 people on there. But I need to go in and adjust your entry to allow the other people to enter. So right now, most of the craft categories are limited to 1 person.
I have one more question. When you if you're working as an MMJ, you clearly written, produced, shot everything yourself. If you want to be able to submit it in a single story to more than one category, is the way to do it essentially to submit it under the craft sort of categories with your same name without sort of breaking the double dipping rule? How does that work? What is the best way to do that? If you have a really strong piece that you want to submit to more than one category, should you submit it to that category and then use the craft categories to submit that piece under your same name in the
Not
other?
if you have the same, not if you have the same role. If you're an MMJ, that's double dipping.
Well, there are
Well,
always,
my question is, say I put it in a category of best feature, but I was the MMJ on this, so could I also put that same piece, not as a reporter, but say as a producer or as a writer for the craft category?
yes. But if you, once you enter it, first of all, if you enter it in the MMJ category, you disqualify it in all the other categories because the MMJ is a combination craft, as I think you know. If you enter the story as a producer in the content category, you're good. We made that provision intentionally. So because, and we left the term producer out of the MMJ description for that reason. So what you would do, let's say you liked your writing, you liked your editing, you liked your video, and all those things were good. You take your best piece, you enter it in the content category as the producer, and then you take the separate crafts and you put them in the individual crafts. There's nothing to prevent you from doing that.
Could you also put it as a reporter in the category and then do, say, producer in the craft or writer in the craft? No.
But yeah, I mean, you can get around that. I mean,
But it's best to do producer if
well,
you're
you're
going
the
to do that.
you can't if you enter as a producer, if you enter as a reporter in a content category, you may not enter reporter in a craft category. Okay, if you did it as an MMJ, Daryl, I don't think there's any rule that says you couldn't enter it as a reporter, a producer, a writer.
Yes, MMJ is restricted to only the MMJ category. It says no other craft category.
Right. So,
So,
stay out of MMJ, you're
If you
good.
do MMJ, that's it for crafts. So
But if you don't do it as MMJ, if you just do it as a reporter for craft story, and then
Yeah.
do producer, writer, shooter, editor for the other categories, that's okay.
You
That
can
is
split it
correct.
all up. Yeah.
that is correct.
Send me an email and I'll send you the longest document you've ever seen based on all the questions that we ever encountered in the Emmy Awards. And that question is answered. But what you talked about right there, we go into in great detail because that is a way to make the system work for you.
We had some issues before of people trying to skirt the rules by changing their roles to producer. So we've come up with some very specific, a very specific definition of what a producer is, which is on page 38 and 39 on the call for entries. There are certain rules that you have to follow in order for us to agree that you are a producer. We just wanted to stop people from bending the rules and being rewarded twice for doing the same work.
And there normally is a producer, an executive producer, and we get entries that have 6 different producers listed on it, or 6 different EPs listed on it. You really have to justify. You have to justify EP to start with. EPs are not allowed because they're management. So if you have an EP that has worked on a piece that you want to enter, and he wants the title of VP, or she wants the title of VP on it, you have to justify that in the précis of why you are submitting, or a separate email to the awards committee of why you're submitting 1 or 2 EPs on a story.
And that really is a good reminder, Daryl, that, everybody who is listed on the entry really has to have worked on the actual project. So, a manager by title, if the person is your EP, they cannot be listed on the entry unless they actually worked on that entry, not just by job, but actually performed a function on that entry. So that is something that, we look at. So when there are 6 producers, it will raise a red flag, and, you might get a call and I'm not saying there aren't 6 producers, it might be perfectly valid, but you will have to just be clear on what role they played. And again, so like myself as a creative director at KGO, I might truly be a creative director on a promo and put myself down as the creative director of a promo. But if I was the editor of the promo, which I also do, I need to list myself as the editor. Your title on an entry should be the role you played in the production, not your job title.
I see. If you are an MMJ though, then you are automatically a producer of any piece, aren't you?
Yeah, if you're working alone, yes, you are.
What is the amount that somebody has to watch if your entry is over 5 minutes? Is it 50%, 25%, 75?
Yeah, 5 minutes is well, let me go check and make sure I'm giving you the right information. So hold on one sec. So up to 5 minutes is 100%. 5 minutes to 15 minutes is 50%. Over 15 minutes is 25%. That
Great.
answers that question.
Thank you, Daryl. I will bring up a couple of questions that I have received and we've answered, but just so everybody on this call or who watches the Zoom knows, one question was, can an English station submit in the Spanish category? So a piece that was, maybe the interviews were done in Spanish and, tracked in Spanish, like if they have an entry that was both in Spanish and in English, an English speaking station can submit in the Spanish contest, but then they cannot submit the same content in the English contest. So they have to choose one or the other, Spanish or English. And that would be the same for a Spanish station entering the English category.
Can I ask a question about the double dipping rule? As a producer, I'm interested in submitting a newscast, and I'm also interested in submitting for the producer craft achievement. Can I have the same content in both of those categories?
Not the same newscast. No, it has to be a different newscast.
So what I submit in the newscast, none of that can be used in my producer reel. Is that correct?
If you're listed on the newscast as the producer, yes. The craft category has to be totally different newscast from what is submitted under the newscast category.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a similar question for the design craft. So if there is like a promo I've worked on or a doc that has my designs in it, if I leave my name off the submission, if they are submitting it for like a promo category, can I put that in with my craft reel? If it, like, say that even some of the stuff that plays that I created, but I leave my name off that submission, can I put it into my craft reel?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to double check.
Right.
You.
So you could choose, as a graphic designer, right, you could choose to, let's say it's for a documentary. You could put your name as a graphic designer on the documentary, or you could put those graphics on your craft in your craft submission, but not both. Same like for a promo. So you could choose different different like if the graphics were for the promo and they are not the same that you're putting in in your craft category, they were from the documentary, that is okay, but it cannot be the same graphics.
So, okay. So
It'd be same subject matter, but not the same graphic.
Okay. To be really specific, if we didn't put that part into the promo submission, could I put a different part that wasn't shown?
Like if there were two promos in the same subject matter, but not the same graphics. Yes. Right.
Okay.
I believe it just cannot be the same graphics.
Okay.
So the other big change this year is the content short form has been changed from 10 to 15 minutes. I don't really know why. There was still, plenty of time under 10 minutes for short form. But short form is now 15 minutes, and that doesn't change what you can put in short form. So remember that the news and programming categories are not composite categories. They are for individual stories or a series or truncation in the long format of our program down to 30 minutes. So if you're doing a series of stories on the same subject that lead from one to the next, that's fine to put those in with and fill in the composite section and fill in the times of those stories. If you use what we consider normal composite, and that is 3 different crime stories that have no relationship to each other, that would be 3 separate entries that would not be allowed to be entered as one entry as a composite. So you cannot put composites in the news and programming categories. You have to put individual stories or a series. Hope that clears things up.
Can we go back and clarify, because we talked about EPs entering? Can EPs enter into a newscast?
Yes, an EP can enter the newscast and normally does.
Yes.
And that's one where basically the newscast there on top of it every day. So there's kind of automatic justification on that one. The news director can also enter the newscast. The news director is limited to the overall excellence or the newscast. If the news director happens to work on a breaking news story, he would have to be, or she would have to be listed as a producer or executive producer on the breaking news, not as a news director.
I had a question on the MMJ category. So would you suggest only submitting one piece or like a composite as well, like different pieces with different stories, like different days as an MMJ versus one?
Put your best work in there. If you think you can tell it better than with 2 or 3 than with 1, then do it that way. But there's no set rule for it. If you did one exceptional piece, put the one exceptional piece. If the other 2 don't measure up to it, then go with the one exceptional piece. People want to see your best work, period.
Okay.
Don't try to convince them, hey, I'm good on Mondays, I'm good on Wednesdays, and I'm good on Fridays. Okay?
Okay. All right.
Allow them, get it on, get it off, and let them move on.
Yeah, also remember in the craft categories that we're judging the craft, we're not judging the content. There is normally 3 sections of the judging system of content, creativity, and execution. On the craft categories, it is creativity and execution only. There's no content in there. So if you've got a story that is really based on content of the story itself, you should enter it into the news and programming categories or news categories rather than into a craft category.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And I would just, for craft categories, any of the categories, I would pay just close attention to the time limits. And the number of, if you are doing a compilation of stories, to make sure that you fall within the 5 lifts or whatever that category predicates.
Okay, thank you. And I had another question, which might be a little bit obvious, but I just wanted to clarify. What would be the main differences between the human interest and news feature category?
There isn't really, except for human interest is also open to programming. Feature is for a news story.
If your piece was produced for a newscast, it could also go in the human interest story. Yes. That would really, to me, the human interest story really focuses on a person or an individual. A news feature doesn't have to be just about an individual. But if it appears in news and it was a feature, it could also go in that category. But if it's a story about, like really great human spirit, someone who overcame an obstacle, that to me is more human interest. Wayne,
okay.
A thought on
even
that?
Even though it's like one story.
It's
like
look, the description says speaks to the human spirit. Translated, that means warm and fuzzy, but not necessarily. It's very much the same as a feature. You take your chances. But remember, you are, as they said, you are up against programming in that other category. So
In the news feature category, everything would have appeared in a newscast. In human interest, it could be it
Either.
could have been on a magazine style program
Oh, I see.
or
Okay.
online, not just newscast.
Okay.
So there's one helpful hint I'll give you. It's costly because it's a $25 fee. But on the 22nd of January, that's a Monday, we will publish on the website a complete list of every entry that is in the English contest and every entry that's in the Spanish contest. You basically have 5 days to just look at the competition that you are up against in a category and say, well, instead of having this in news feature, I'm going to move it over to a different category or vice versa. So that's the one thing that you can do. Once that list comes out, you can see who you're up against in a category, and you may want to change it to another category. Now, several people may be doing the same thing, and you may have 3 things that are moved from one into another one, and then you're still stuck against them. But that we can't do anything about. But you do have that option. There's a $25 processing fee to change a category. But once that list comes out, be sure and check the list to make sure that everything is accurate, that we haven't made typos when we've transformed from one listing to another. I have to download everything out of Emmy Express into an Excel spreadsheet. One of the big issues is everybody puts things in capitals only, and on the spreadsheet that we post has to have upper and lowercase. So please use upper and lowercase and not everything in cap. Also, your name, when you put it on the entry, is automatically taken off of the entry form. So, off of the membership form. So if you are a member and using the member discount, and you have your married name under the membership side, and you have your on-air name under the entry side, there'll be a conflict there. So you should go into the membership side and make it your on-air name, and then you can footnote it with your married name also on the contact information. But be sure that that name is a drop down and it pulls out and it shows there's an error if those names don't match.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. I never realized this before in all these years of entering. So anything that falls under news gathering, you're only competing against news reports. Anything under news and programming, that's where you might see a production company or something like that competing. Is that right?
Yeah, and you'll see a lot of web content under the news and content side. So anything that's on the web that's not, put out by a bona fide news department would be in those categories, and you would be up against them. So that's why they're news and content categories.
Does the membership give you any discount in terms of entry?
Yes, it does. Yeah,
Significantly so.
especially if you do more than one entry.
I have
So
a question.
basically,
I think, the list that Daryl mentioned also is important to go back and review for a couple of reasons. One, to make sure that, somebody at your station didn't submit a piece that you actually worked on, especially for a graphic designer like Danny. He might go through the list and see a news package and say, oh, I did all the graphics for that news package. I'd like to be included on the entry. And then you can go to the producer and ask to be included on that entry. There will be a late fee, of course, because this is after the final submission date, but that is important. And again, just spellings, you might have made a typo on your own name or on one of your colleagues' names. It's also very important to check.
You're submitting a series. Is it the same rules for the video as a composite where you have 1 second of black in between each piece?
Correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Do you have to put in the entire piece, or can you just put a piece of it?
It says as aired. If you want to cut the piece short, you can cut the piece short, but you can't edit the piece.
You can't cut out the middle and put the 2 pieces together and have it count as one submission, right? If you did that, that would be included as a lift, right? So you'd have to put the second of black there wherever you make an edit.
I have a question specifically for the graphic art, since you can include a video that shows the progress of your craft. How would you like that formatted? Like if I'm showing, could I do like a voiceover kind of explaining like the layers that I'm showing, or like the people judging the craft category are going to understand like, you know, what they're looking at in After Effects or something like that.
You can't do any voiceover. You can't do any
Okay.
change. You cannot change anything. And you
No,
cannot.
I understand that, but it does say that you can include a before and after video to demonstrate like how the craft was created.
It's unique to the craft category for the graphic designers, Wayne. Like,
it?
yeah, they can actually go in and include like, okay, say we're doing a video and I want to get rid of this reflection of my ring light, and Danny goes in and does that in a graphic. And if he puts that piece of video in the submission, he can show how he got rid of the ring light.
News to me.
It's unusual. It's the only
Yeah,
category, I believe, where you can do that.
And there's an exemption of the 5 lifts. You can put more than 5 lifts in the graphics side. So if you wanted to show different versions of the what you did to it, you can do that. But you would have to explain that in the précis. You can't add additional extra video or
Not voiceover.
audio to it. It has to be
Narrate it.
as Eric prioritized. Right.
So,
Okay.
so in that case, Danny, yeah, I would suggest putting it in the précis. And then, and then including like a before after. Also, for all the judging, and I do encourage everybody on the call and everybody who enters to please judge, because it's a great experience of knowing what the judging process is like, and also seeing what's out there in the other markets, and you get really great ideas, and you might say, wow, the level of work I did, was on par with this, or, oh, now I see what level of work I should be entering. It's just a really great experience. But the people who judge should have expertise in your category. So the people who are judging graphic arts should know After Effects, right? So it shouldn't really need much. It shouldn't need that voiceover track, because they should be other graphic designers who are judging your work. And that is one of the reasons why when you sign up to be a member of Natus, it does kind of give you that questionnaire of, what your experience is, so that, they know, okay, when I edit, when I go to judge an editing category, that yes, I am in fact a video editor, right? So I'm qualified to judge that category.
We have a question in the chat from Brian Maeda about a documentary. Brian, do you want to ask?
Actually, Daryl had emailed me and told me that I was in the wrong category, and I should be in the documentary category. And I'm assuming that is the 17A cultural historical category. And, they require 60-minute submission, which would be, what I had broadcasted with closed caption. Is that correct?
Right. You said yours was a 3-hour or something. It was longer than 60 though, right?
Minute.
Yeah. Okay. And it's a sports in nature, correct?
It's a historical documentary. Yes.
Yeah. But that was the question where when the original call came out, it had sports documentary in there, which our chapter does not offer a sports documentary. We refer everything to the documentary category. So there was when after the first 2 days, I think it was, that we corrected that on the call. So if you had the first call, it had sports documentary in there, which we don't offer. So there's just so that everybody knows, there is a list of like over 100 categories that the chapters have the ability to go in to decide which ones they want to offer for their particular chapter. And our chapter is, we limit quite a few and roll up. For example, you can have news only crime stories. We have crime and open to both news and programming. So those could be 2 separate categories, but we roll those up into one. And there are a lot of different categories that we roll up. Documentary is one of those, where we only allow documentaries in the documentary category, and we don't offer a sports documentary.
Right. I got it the wrong category. But so you tell me the documentary category. and submit under documentary.
Right.
And that
Can
would be,
go, can get, it's limited to 60 minutes. And if it's over 60 minutes, you can do 3 lifts to truncate that down to 60 minutes. So you would do an open, middle, and close to it.
yeah, it's exactly 60 minutes now.
Okay.
And just to
As aired or as edited?
As aired.
Okay, that's
It's
the
been-
important part. So you can't, if you're truncating it to make it 60 minutes, you have to put the black in and show us that there's 3 segments to it. If it's as aired 60 minutes, then you're fine.
Yeah, 60 minutes.
Okay, perfect. You're in good shape.
And Daryl, just to touch on what you said, the reason that we may not have the same entries as another market, like say you're coming from another market and another Emmy branch, it's because of what gets entered, in this contest. To keep the contest elite, and Wayne can speak to this, to keep the contest up to the standard of winning an Emmy. There has to be a certain amount of competition, right? If we do a sports documentary category and we're only getting 1 entry year after year after year, that contest will be eliminated and it'll be rolled up into another category. It could be that you go to there's a huge sports market and they do a ton of, sports documentaries. If that's not the case here, we don't have that category. Just using that as an example. It's a good reason to encourage your colleagues to enter. We always say like, okay, this contest, this category might be on the bubble this year. We haven't had much interest in it. Storytelling types go in and out, like there might be years when we have a ton of environment stories. And then for the next 8 years, we don't have environment stories and that category might go away. So it really does match the trends, and it's to keep the contest elite, right? If we get 1 entry in a category and that, we're not just going to hand somebody an Emmy because it's the only entry in the category. It still has to meet the standards, and the high level of excellence that we come to expect with an Emmy.
Yeah, that's an important one because we have added the vulnerability paragraph into the standard clauses, and that is that we have to have at least 5 entries in each category in order to send them out for judging. And if it's under that, the awards committee has to take a look at that and see if those can be rolled up into another category, or we would have to inform those entrants in that category that the category doesn't have enough entries in it, and you can either move it to another category or ask for a refund. If we have a category that does not meet those criteria, you're going to hear from the awards committee.
Well, I'm sure you're going to have enough entries that come into the category of historical documentary. My film is about the incarceration of the Japanese Americans during World War II. I wouldn't think there'd be a lot of those, but I would think that there would be other historical documentaries.
Yes. Yeah, we haven't had an issue with the documentary category. The vulnerability has more to do with the Spanish categories, which we have tried to each year consolidate those into roll up as best we can so that we know that we're going to get at least 4 or 5 entries in each of those. But with the Spanish, there's a lot less entries overall of the 2 contests. So it's really important in the Spanish side that we have at least 5 entries in each of the categories that come through.
We don't have a problem finding a category, an alternate category for those that fall under the limit. And really, if you look at the call for entries, it's a pretty big call for entries. If you look at the other competitions, they just have news and programming. It's very narrow. So, we do offer quite a variety of categories for people to enter.
And we really do, a whole committee of people meets every year to, really take a look at what the trends are, what the viable categories are. Are we missing something? Do we need to add something? We look at a list. Wayne serves on a national committee that provides categories for us. And we look at that list every year and decide, okay, we should add that. We should take this away, just to make it the most the highest number of viable categories for our market.
One other thing we should note, though, is we always tried, I know you still do, to make sure that there was always a category for whatever or whomever entered. So even though we might have taken out a specific category, there would still be a place for that person to enter somewhere else. Maybe not where they wanted to exactly, but we generally found a way.
Yeah, we do try, to cover a wide range of expertise, even on the awards committee. You have people representing news, myself from marketing, other folks from sports. Like it is a wide range of expertise and crafts represented on the committee and on the board of NATIS in general.
What's everybody's thoughts about entering more than one piece in a category? If that's really the category that's right for those pieces, what are your thoughts on that?
Do it, but consider that you might be competing against yourself.
But you could also win two in the same category.
That's true. That's happened before. If you have two or three strong pieces that you feel strongly about, then enter them.
We had a woman at KGO 2 years ago who there were two nominees in the category, and she was both of the nominees. So she won, but she beat herself. but she could have, if had both scores been high enough, she could have actually won both in the same category. We do have quite a few ties. If it reaches a high enough level of average score, it will be awarded an entry, an Emmy, even if it's 2 or 3 in the same category.
You want to talk about the 7-point scale?
Maybe you should do that, Wayne, or Pamela, or Chris.
Pamela,
Well, it used to be judged on a 10-point scale. That is now it's 7. NATIS has done surveys to show that most people judge within a 3-point scale. And so 7 seems to be, a good average, and it shouldn't affect the way that our pieces are judged. It's just, it's a different scale.
Broadens the spread. If you look at the way it used to be, basically 1 through 5 was not Emmy worthy. The way it's going to be, it's so anything that might have been was judged on essentially not a 10-point scale, but a 5 scale, but 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But the first 5 were worthless. So what they've done is essentially now they've said the first one is definitely not Emmy award worthy, and then from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, there are different degrees and grades of Emmy worthy, and that hopefully will give the awards committee this year a better spread and more clear-cut recipients and non-recipients and nominees and non-nominees. But that's the plan, and for national, it's worked very well. National, when they in our chapter, my former chapter, your chapter, it used to be that if it's over 90, we automatically award it. Now you're going to have larger spreads and perhaps a better clear-cut winner than what you had before.
I have a question that I wanted to get in. This is from an independent producer who submits work to a PBS station. How do I judge if my entry is regional or national? We just had an entry like that, and we determined that it had more of a national audience, even though some of the subject matter had to do with our region.
This all started with the Washington Post, which had a very large video department, and they were entering the Emmys in that region, and they were entering stories that were national stories, and they were putting them in the local Emmy Awards, and there was a huge dust up over that. So it came down to the question of intent. Where is your intended audience? If your intended audience is regional, then it's a regional Emmy. If it's not intended, if it's a national story intended to a national audience, then it's not regional. The best example I could give you would be, let's say a network crew came to San Francisco and did a story about San Francisco and then put it on the evening news. Is that story national or is that regional? Anybody want to hazard a guess?
That would be national.
National.
It's national. So You might have a national website doing a story about San Francisco and putting it on their website and saying, well, it was about, but no, not really. It was intended for a national audience. So, and that's often a judgment call, but it's usually fairly clear cut.
I think somebody might have mentioned this, Wayne, speaking of distribution, internet only stories are okay as long as they are on a station's site, correct? Entries don't necessarily have to have aired on linear.
It has to be on a public website on the content side. So it can't be on your personal page or a personal Facebook page or that. It has to be a public website in order to qualify as an entry.
Nor does the website need to be a television station. It can be a local organization geared to this region.
As long as it is a local, intended for a local audience.
Yeah,
you're fine. Yeah, even though
what about a piece? What about a piece of content that is on a station's social platform as opposed to their owned website?
I think that ought to be all right, Daryl.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay,
yeah.
Great.
I just want one more clarification on the regional national. If you choose to go national, it cannot be entered in any form on the regional side. We had a fantastic national entry last year that happened to be entered in a craft award in the local chapter, and national disqualified it because it was a regional entry and had been entered in regional. So even though the whole story and everything was considered national, they wanted to enter it in the national news and doc. Since when they did their search, they found that there was a portion of that story that was entered in a craft category in our regional Emmys that they disqualified it from the national story. So if you're entering national because your story went national, make sure that nothing, it appears, of that into the local side.
The circumstances on that were, it was even more unfortunate because the editor entered the piece locally, but the producer entered the piece nationally. Mm-hmm. And once it was entered locally, it was not eligible nationally, and no one was talking. The producer of the show claims to have no knowledge that it was entered regionally. So they got a national nomination. They may very well have been a national recipient for all we know, but they had to be disqualified. And the only person receiving that work was the editor.
I do, again, that is kind of a tragic story. I will mention again, please do think about when you enter, think about every person who worked on that piece and who should be included on the entry. Remember that your editors, your photographers, your talent, your graphic designers, who truly contributed and who deserves to be on the entry, and please do talk to them about it. That is, I think, one thing that really does happen is you might accidentally forget to include someone, but please do try to do your due diligence. And if you are entering something that a producer has opted not to, you should always talk to the producer. The producer should be the primary entrant unless they choose not to be a part of it, but they should know, that you are entering it, not in your craft category necessarily, but in, if they are, and, an editor shouldn't just be putting a story in to a content category without letting the producer know.
Yeah, also on that one, PAs and interns are not eligible. So a production assistant is not part of the creative portion of it. An intern may be helpful, but it's not part of the creative part of it. So you'd have to give them a different title than PA and intern.
And that goes back to, they should be listed as the contribution they provided. If they did research and it was vital to your piece, that, it should be that. They shouldn't be listed as a PA or an intern. They should be listed as your research analyst or.
Daryl and Pamela, if there are questions about a category, like if the committee, when they're certifying the pieces, looks at something and says, this really doesn't qualify for this category, does the entrant have an opportunity to make a case for why they entered in that category and to talk to you about it and sort of respond before it ultimately potentially gets moved or refunded?
Yes.
Of course, we let you know that there is an issue and you have the chance to talk to us about it. But we do have to tell you that on the really sticky issues, very often we ask national. And we've turned over a lot of our entries to national, and they've made a decision, and their decision is final.
Well, actually, the regional decision is final.
Right. We're
We
final
choose to,
too,
we
but
choose to go take the extra step and get additional input to it. But the awards committee has the final certification of every entry that comes in, and every name that's on there has to be certified. So you will be getting calls from the awards committee when we get into the certification process and ask questions. In 90% of the time, the questions are answered positively and everything goes through normally and is fine. But there are those times when something has to get pulled. But we do our best to make sure that we get it in the right place.
Okay, thanks so much. And then once they're certified and they go off for judging, is whatever region is judging them, do they sort of trust that they've been certified and they're good and they judge them? Or do you ever get pushback from the region that's judging that says, hey, this feels like it's a gray area or this shouldn't have been in this category? And if that happens, then what?
when you're judging, you have the option of challenging an entry. And you can write out what that entry is, and then the regional will address that challenge.
Yeah, the most common one is this is an investigative piece and it's not an investigative category. And if we have already vetted that and certified that it's okay in another category, it would stay in that other category. The other thing is, as you're judging and you do challenge something, we ask you to go ahead and judge it as if there were no challenge and you were judging it against the scores of excellence again, and you would judge it normally and not pull something down because you felt it was in the wrong category.
So that way, Melanie, if we decide, no, that's exactly where it belongs, that piece still has a score. It still has a valid judge score. And then one more note on the judging, which, I know people ask this. I've gotten this question, which is not really about entries, but it's more about judging. When it comes time for nominations, it is truly blind. Like the people who are on the awards committee do not know when they're discussing numbers and nominations, we do not know what the category is or what the winner is. So it is truly blind on, once we get those scores back from the judging chapters.
Well, do you want to explain? I've done blind judging before, but I wouldn't mind a refresher on this. When you guys go to do that, it's not like there's one number or cutoff, right? It depends on how the votes came in and what the overall numbers are. It might change from category to category. Is that correct?
Yes, in the past, when we had 9 and above, that was an automatic Emmy, and then 8 was a nomination. Of course, all of that's going to change this year. But there are some categories where it might be an 8.75, and that's the highest score. And taking a look at the other scores, we might have awarded that entry an Emmy. So it depends on the other scores, and it depends on the category and the ultimate score.
Or we might choose not to, that may be why you see categories that have no nomination, right? If the highest nominated score coming in is a 8.4, let's say, right, in our old averages on a 10-point scale, that category probably would have no nominations because it has no winner. We're not going to, put nominations in and not have a winner. So that's why you see that happening. But when we make that decision, we don't know what the category is. It could be newscast or it could be, craft editor. We don't know. We make those decisions based solely on the numbers so that there is no bias.
I thought we had moved away from that, or am I confused? Where we weren't doing no nominations anymore?
The rules say there can be a recipient, more than one recipient, or no recipients in any category. This awards committee has chosen not to have nominations without a recipient. The rules allow you to do that. There are other chapters that do that and have a list of nominations and no winner or no recipient. Our awards committee has frowned from doing that and doesn't. But according to the rules, yes, you can have nominations without a recipient.
But there won't be, but what won't happen is if, like, let's say there were only 50s and nothing fell in that, 8 to 9 nomination window, it's not like we would nominate the 50s and have a winner from the 50s.
Yeah, we have a scale for the nominations as well.
Was it last year that the nominations came down almost exactly as defined the way they should in English? And the year before that was the case with Spanish.
There's the blind scoring. So you can see in these particular categories, they had 4 nominations and 1 recipient. Here's one that had 2 recipients and 4 nominations. So there were 2 90s and an 85 and 87, then it dropped down to 82. You can see how far it went down on this one. So each bell curve is looked at individually when we go through them. We have no idea what category is behind each of these. It could be a craft, it could be overall excellence, it could be a newscast, it could be anything. You don't know that. So, and here's one where there was no nominations. There's 2 of them here, 3 of them here with no nominations. So it varies as the day goes on.
And I'm always interested to see what names Daryl will give these categories. Those were Silver Circle member class names, I think.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the quotas in terms of 25% nominations, 10% recipients, and how you try to stick to that?
Yeah, I mean, again, that varies on the bell curve and it varies from chapter to chapter, but we normally have 25 to 30% nominations and 10 to 12% of recipients. So when you look at the overall 100%, only about 10% or less, sometimes it's using 9.5, are going to go home with a statue. So it's a coveted award, and it's an award of excellence. It's not just handed out. It has to be earned.
And that is why, this isn't, you're not just paying for the award. I know that, like, that's what people say. This is really to keep it meaningful. So, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier is, making sure that we don't have too many categories with, very few entrants.
Yeah, and that's the other thing to remember is that in order to take home a statue, your name has to be on that entry form by March 31st. So if you come along and the nominations come out in May and you say, oh, I worked on that, add my name to it, it's too late. Your name has to be on there by March 31st. So that's why it's important to check over that list, make sure that your name is on every entry that you worked on so that you can come home with that statue. Everybody that is listed on the entry form, and that entry is the recipient, will go home with a statue. That again varies from chapter to chapter. There are other chapters that give out a producer Emmy period. And then if your name was listed on that entry, you can purchase a trophy for yourself. We give complimentary trophies to everyone that is listed. So our entry fee covers all of those entrants. There can only be up to 12 entrants on a particular category. If you worked on a major breaking news story like the Maui fires or something where you had 15 people work on that particular story, you could enter all 15, but there is a $25 surcharge for everyone over for all 15 of those entrants. So once you go to 13, a $25 surcharge is added to all 13 people, not just the number 13. So keep that in mind when you petition to go over the 12, that everybody is going to get hit with the extra. And again, small markets get the same Emmy as the large markets, and it costs a chapter the same amount of money, although the entry fees are much less in the medium and smaller markets. But it averages out that we again have not raised our entry fees in 7 years now that we have maintained the same entry fee. We've had to increase the gala fee a little bit because of the cost of catering and AV, but we try to keep the entry fee to itself. And same with membership fees. We have not increased our membership fees in a number of years. So you're actually entering 2024 at what 2017 prices. So it's not a bad deal.
And if you look at the other competitions, we're really quite reasonable. Some of the Murrows and the Gabriels and Peabodys, they're like $200 and $300 for an entry. So it's a good deal.
You might also add that of all the contests out there, this is probably the one that gets the most looks at any submission.
This is definitely the most rigorous judging. I judge Murrows as well, and this is definitely the most rigorous and most fair blind judging.
Time's about up. Any other questions we need to answer for folks that are here?
I had a quick question. Can we submit in two craft categories? Like say MMJ and editor or
No.
ink?
No.
Yeah, MMJ is restricted to MMJ. If you are an MMJ and don't enter the MMJ category, you could enter it as an editor, you could enter it as a photographer, you could enter it as a writer. You could enter that same piece in 3 different categories, but not MMJ. If you look at the rules, MMJ says it's restricted from all other craft categories.
Oh, okay.
But you can enter something different. So just because you're an MMJ doesn't mean you can't enter as an editor if it's different content.
Different content, correct.
Or anchor, the anchor position as well.
Mm-hmm. As long as it's different.
Okay.
Well, thank you everybody for joining. Just a reminder, the deadline is next Friday. The master list comes out on January 22nd. Last date to add names is March 31st. The nominations come out on May 12th, is it? And the ceremony is in June 12th. So book your flights.
Quick reminder and a plug for our social media platforms. A lot of these questions have been answered there. A lot of the questions that were brought up tonight will be posted there anonymously, of course, and we'll send out reminders of dates and deadlines and whatnot. So another good way to reach out to us. So if you could help us amplify that, follow us, MESF TV on Instagram, Facebook, X, not Threads, and LinkedIn.
Chris, thank you so much for fielding all those questions and doing such a great job of posting them on MESF so that everyone can benefit from the answers. That's huge.
Thank you. It's good for us too.
And you can also, reach out to anybody from your station who is on the board of directors. You can reach out to Pam, Chris, and myself. I know Wayne has answered lots of questions for folks, but yeah, please do look at your list. Anybody on the board can point you in the right direction to find the answer for you if you have a question.
Thank you.